everyone, and welcome. I'm Megan Claire Chase, Share Cancer Support's Breast Cancer Program Director and host of our BC Life podcast, and I'm also an AYA breast cancer survivor. Now, before the conversation begins, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Share. We are a national nonprofit that supports, educates, and empowers anyone diagnosed with breast or gynecologic cancers, and provides outreach to the general public about signs and symptoms, because no one should have to face breast, ovarian, uterine, cervical, or metastatic breast cancer alone. For more information about upcoming webinars, support groups, podcasts, and our helplines, please visit our website at sharecancersupport.org. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with the term AYA cancer, in the cancer space, it stands for Adolescent and Young Adult, meaning anyone diagnosed with cancer under the age of 40. Being part of the AYA cancer community comes with its own set of unique challenges and experiences. And since this is AYA Cancer Awareness Week, I am really excited to be joined by two amazing guests who are also part of this community, Julia and Elena. Both are fellow breast cancer survivors and facilitators of our AYA breast cancer support group here at Share. So welcome, Julia and Elena. I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you.
All right, so let's dive in, shall we? Because we have a lot to unpack about what it means to face breast cancer as a young adult. So to kick things off, let's start with how each of us found out we had cancer. Julia, let's start with you.
Yeah, I'm Julia. I had a very unique cancer experience. Was diagnosed with one of the most rare breast cancers, inflammatory breast cancer. It affects roughly about 5 to 7% of all breast cancers, but it accounts for about 10% of all breast cancer deaths. And it's different because it involves the skin instead of just the breast tissue. And so it's always considered a stage 3 or 4 diagnosis. It's different because there's no set tumor, it expands outwards. And oftentimes you don't have a lump. So it's very often misdiagnosed as mastitis. And it appears overnight. So I was working as a nurse, and I woke up and my right breast was red and swollen and my nipple was inverted. And I was just like, that's weird. Never once did I think this is cancer. I went and worked for 3 days straight, as nurses do, and told all my nurse buddies, and none of us thought cancer. Saw my doctor that Friday, and she put me on antibiotics. But the saving grace was she said, let's get some scans just in case, which is often not the case for IBC patients. We often get put on antibiotics after antibiotics after antibiotics until it's stage 4. So I was really, really lucky that I had a great doctor who knew to put me in for scans. And from that scan, the radiologist told me right then and there, this looks like inflammatory breast cancer. It's very serious. And he literally picked up the phone at like 4 p.m. and called a surgeon, and it all snowballed from there.
Wow. I mean, wow. And also, too, so many people don't even realize there are so many different types of breast cancer and then like rare breast cancers. So thank you, Julia, for sharing that. Elena, how about you? How did you first find out that you were diagnosed with breast cancer?
So I was diagnosed with breast cancer at a very routine well woman appointment. So I actually wasn't due all of my screenings, which aren't so frequent when you're under 40. But I was there with my gynecologist to talk about contraception and just kind of get a general checkup. I was very fortunate that she did a breast exam as part of that wellness check, and she found a lump. So I hadn't felt it before myself. And she kind of guided my hand, was like, have you felt this before? And it was not something I'd come across, not something I was familiar with. I have now learned that I had very dense breasts and they just felt kind of lumpy. And to be honest, I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. So she sent me for some scans. I went for a biopsy. There was a lot of people in and out the room. At the time, I thought that was normal, but I think they were probably, having an extra look and understanding what was there. And eventually I got my diagnosis. But I also, I feel like maybe there's no standard cancer diagnosis story, but I also had an unusual tumor type. So my gynecologist wasn't so familiar. So she called me, she told me the technical name, but she never said the words, "You have cancer." So I was sat at my desk, I took the call, I answered it, and so I wrote everything down and I was like, but what does this mean? Is this good news, bad news? And I remember very vividly writing on a sticky note, "bad news." And then I proceeded to Google it after I'd got off the phone, Dr. Google, and then realized really how serious things were. So, like Julia, my experience then snowballed. It took a little bit of time to get some answers, and it was a big shock. But that's my diagnosis story, and I'm very grateful I went to that routine checkup.
Oh my gosh. Before I get into a little bit of mine, Julia, how old were you when you got that cancer information?
Girl, it was the day after my 32nd birthday is when my symptoms appeared. Okay.
Why is it always after something that's like so joyful and
Important.
wonderful?
Right?
Oh my gosh. Elena, how about you?
So I was 28. So it was
Like,
not on my radar at all.
I mean, again, this is like why it's like it's shocking because you're not even old enough to even get like a mammogram, you know? So a little bit of my story. Um, I was diagnosed 2 months after my 39th birthday. So I'm at the older end of the AYA. And I knew something was wrong for over 2 years, but I had very strange symptoms that no one thought was related to breast cancer. And because my mother is an ovarian cancer survivor, I was able to get a mammogram covered, a preventative one covered, because you can get a mammogram at any time, but to have it 100% covered, you're supposed to meet those age requirements. And I was not there yet. But because at that ovarian and breast cancer kind of correlation, I was able to get one. They were like, hey, you're clear, come back when you're 40. And I was like, awesome. Now, I went and looked back at my paperwork. They never told me, like, to my face, hey, you have dense breasts, which means such and such, right? And then I started to wonder, like, years later, did anyone ever tell me? But I saw it, like, in small writing, like, in the report. And so I'll never forget it. For some reason, I was obsessed with the show Supergirl. The first season, it was like my guilty pleasure. I was coming in after work. And now part of my symptoms was weight gain. I was never an overweight person. And because of that weight gain, I had like bigger boobs. So I was always feeling them, right? Well, that night when I'm like, yes, I'm gonna shower, get my favorite jammies and everything. And I went to, go and wash. And then I felt it and it was huge. And I didn't think breast cancer because it was like almost on the side near my underarm, and you could actually see it raised, and it was like the length of a fist, and it was as hard as a rock. And I'm like, what is this? And so ultimately, I got the cancer call while at work. I really don't like that because the last thing I want is for anyone at work to know something so scary and deeply personal before I can process it. But that's what happened. And I was diagnosed with invasive lobular breast cancer survivor. And lobular is known as the sneaky cancer, and it's very slow growing. So more than likely, it had been growing in me for about 8 to 10 years. And it's often difficult to detect if you have dense breasts because it can mask and look like healthy tissue. So I think it's so interesting that all three of us have had different types of breast cancer,
Mhm.
right? Well, now one of the biggest areas that's impacted by cancer, especially at our young age, right? Friendships and relationships. Elena, how has cancer affected your friendships, your relationships? And by relationships, that can mean like with a partner or someone, or even like colleagues, etc. How has that been for you?
So it definitely had a really big impact that was very difficult to navigate and understand. So I got diagnosed in my late 20s, and I would say that your 20s are a particularly tumultuous time. You've got people who are getting married and settled with children, you have people who are kind of off backpacking, and everything in between. You have people who are still studying. So I think keeping tabs on long-term friendships and stuff was very difficult anyway at that time, and finding where you fit. And I was very much a career girl, but I also was traveling, so I was living overseas. So in the US, I'm from England originally. So a lot of my real core support system were based in England, and they weren't able to be beside me throughout my diagnosis. I also think that there's a lot of wisdom that comes with age. And so I felt like I outgrew, and also comes with a cancer diagnosis. So I felt like I outgrew my friends in some ways, of like the concerns and the priorities that I had really shifted. My social scene adjusted a lot. I couldn't do the things that I was used to doing. So I definitely wasn't going out partying. I wasn't able to go out hiking, adventuring, catching red eyes. Like all of that was off the table for me at that point. And I found it really difficult to adjust and understand how those relationships are. And then for my romantic relationships, thank goodness I was done dating, because I know from a lot of my peers in the community, dating is really tough in general. So dating after a cancer diagnosis is also really challenging. But I had just moved in with my partner. So it was our first time living together. We're now married. So thankfully it all worked out. But this really wasn't on our bingo card for the year. We'd got our first apartment. We were feeling each other out, seeing how things would go. He hadn't met my parents yet, because with COVID, everything was different. And suddenly we were kind of thrust into this world where he became my entire support system. And I think it was a really, really big adjustment for both of us. So it was challenging. Yeah.
Wow.
She
I
left
am
out the
like,
best part.
right? Like I'm learning all of this in like real time, and I'm just like that's intense. That's intense. Julia, tell us how your cancer diagnosis has affected your friendships and relationships.
Yeah, I am one of the very, very lucky few. I say this all the time, I guess, that my friends were amazing and they just stepped up from the jump. I know a lot of people in our community go through ghosting where their friends just fall off the face of the earth, and my friends were just there, and it was awesome. Um, another, and I think what made it so unique was they stepped up to they used their talents and abilities and what they could do, and they offered that up without me asking. So I have friends who are great cooks and they cooked me food. I have friends whose parents own a cabin in Western Nebraska. And so they said, right before chemo started, we're taking you out there and we're going to the cabin for a weekend before you start all of this. And so it was that very distinct support, and I didn't have to ask. And that made a huge difference. And then also, I made new amazing friends. Elle is one of my first cancer breasties and a good friend, and we talk all the time. And I think we'll be lifelong friends. And that is just beautiful. Now, my relationship.
Wow.
I was already married when I was diagnosed. We had been together for quite some time, years. But I was the breadwinner. I was the planner. I was the cleaner. I was the type A, get things done. And that worked for us. It was great. And then I was diagnosed, and all of a sudden, my husband had to like totally step up and become the caretaker, which was not his typical role. And so he became what a lot of people in the community call a co-survivor. So the co-survivor is kind of the caregiver or the person who does this with you. And he went on his whole own journey. And that was a lot. He went from someone who was not very spiritual to someone who now believes in the afterlife and reincarnation and all of these things that I kind of then had to take a step back and go, whoa, you're like totally different. This is wild. And so we started therapy pretty early on, which was amazing. 10 out of 10 recommend, both on our own and together. And something his therapist said to us really affected me. She said, no matter what, cancer or not, if you're doing life right, you should be growing. And that growing can take on, you learn things and you start new passions and you get rid of old and you have new hobbies and interests and all these things, right? She said, about every 7 years, you should be a new person. And so that means, and this is so beautiful. Oh, I just love it. That means that within that 7-year period, you get to meet and date and take out and learn this new spouse that you have, and it gets to keep it fun and fresh, and you can talk about all of these new things that they're into that you didn't know about. And it's really just changed our marriage, and it's made it so beautiful and loving. But believe we had to put in that work and really kind of sit down, and I had to give him that space after I was done with active treatment. And I kind of even said to our friends, like, listen, he's going through something. He's not hurting anyone. He's safe. He's fine. But he's got to go through it. And we're just going to support him through that like we supported me. So yeah, and now we're just in this beautiful spot.
Okay, I did not expect to be crying. Yeah, that was beautiful. Oh my goodness. For both of you, it really is about, like, the cancer doesn't just affect you. It affects those who you love, but in a different way. Wow. Okay, so apparently, I am the last single person on the face of the earth. Again, like, what is happening? So for me, I was very open about my story. And right before the cancer diagnosis, I had stopped dating because I wanted to do like internal work and all that. And I was just ready to like hit the scene again. And then I get this diagnosis. And I was like, well, that's just not going to happen. And so that was kind of hard to swallow because I come from a cancerous family. So I knew that this is going to take like a long time to go through. And I knew it was going to be really physically tough. I had never met anyone else my age that had gone through cancer. But when I was so open with my story from the get-go, I mean, people from like elementary school like came out of the woodworks. And I mean, I was really overwhelmed in a beautiful way at the outpour of people wanting to, make food or, help take me somewhere or whatever. And I was like, how lovely. But then, I knew that some of those, they wouldn't be there once I entered that quote unquote survivorship stage. And that was hard. And I also had a difficult time talking to those outside of cancer land, as I call it, because I met my chemo twin, Aaron, shout out Aaron. We talked all the time, and these friendships, like with Julia and Elena here, like they're so deep, right? In the cancer space. They are so deep, like immediately. And it made it really challenging to not always be talking about cancer when I'm with friends outside of cancer land. So I did struggle with some of that.
Elle is my chemo twin. I didn't know there was a word for it. That's how we became friends. We found out we started
Yeah, I
chemo
was
the
just
same day.
thinking the same thing.
Really?
Yeah.
Wait, well, okay, we need to have a little bit of the story here. Tell me the story. How'd y'all become chemo twins?
Yeah, we were in a support group for young adults with breast cancer, and she was saying she was starting chemo, and I was like, wait, I'm starting chemo too the same day. And we exchanged numbers and started texting. And yeah, from the chair, like, are you getting ready? Are you, yeah, what time are you? Yeah,
It
Oh,
was really special.
it was.
Um, Julia and I both went through chemo at a time when we weren't allowed to have guests with us because of the pandemic at that time. So she was my company in the chair. Sometimes we even wore like matching outfits and stuff. We were miles apart, nowhere near, but she was my company in the chair, and we would message backwards and forwards. And I will never forget the group that we met in. I was really scared and I felt really lonely. I didn't know anyone else my age. And I just remember Julia saying really vividly, because I had this diagnosis, I had these words, and no one was matching up. So I was diagnosed with a squamous cell, which is quite unusual. And Julia said, listen, I'm a nurse. And if you're an unusual diagnosis, we're all going to have eyes on you. She was like, the second someone unusual comes in, we're all focused and we all have eyes on that person. So you're going to be fine. They're going to give you the best team because you have something different. And I still remember her saying that and bringing me such comfort at that time. So.
Thanks, friend.
okay. Everyone get the tissues, because I met my chemo twin, Erin. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, and at that time we had a class called Chemoflage. Yes, Chemoflage, and it was by this woman, and OG, so to speak, who had gone through breast cancer and wanted to give back. And so we met with, it was like 8 patients, and then your co-survivor or caregiver could come with you. And you kind of learned all the potential things that could happen. And we all had different cancers. Not everyone was breast, not everyone was female in that group. But there was Erin and her mom. I was there with mine. And she, like, we're the same height. We both had on New Balance sneakers, and they were like the same color too. Like, I mean, it was just insane. And then she had invasive ductal, I had invasive lobular. And then we were both starting like our chemo around the same time. And so she was my only friend at that point. And though she lived here, we were treated at the different cancer centers. Hers in the burbs, I was more in the city. And so we would be texting, etc. And then we went to what we call Camp Hope out here in Georgia, out in the mountains. I was like, I hope there's air conditioning, because I don't do well out in the woods. And she ended up being my buddy, and no one knew that we like had known each other. So we were like, oh my God, we are the twins. And that was how everyone called us the entire time at Camp Hope, the chemo twins, and that has just stuck.
I love it.
The universe had plans for you both.
I
If
mean,
it
for
wasn't
all,
being in that same room wearing the same shoes, they were like, you're gonna be friends. You have to.
you really do. And again, it's like the fact with some of the people, I often say, I may not know your middle name, I may not even know your last name, but darn it, I may know your bowel movements, I may know if you're nauseous, things like that. And I think that's what's unique about being diagnosed under 40, quite frankly. So I'm gonna take it, we're gonna get a little serious here, and we're gonna talk about financial toxicity. That's another huge part that just is not talked about enough, that financial side of cancer, whether it's dealing with work, insurance, or keeping up with life expenses while going through treatment. So, Elena, how have you managed the financial aspects of treatment as an AYA?
I think it was definitely a steep learning curve for me. All of the finances are very complicated. I was fortunate but unfortunate to be diagnosed in December. And I had my big surgeries and treatments starting the following year. And this was really the first big health event that I had had where I'd had to use my insurance to the fullest. And I was relatively responsible for my age group. So I did have a health savings account and I did have a lump of like a nest egg in there for if something goes wrong, if I break my leg, whatever, I have this and I compare it to towards my insurance. But what I hadn't planned for is the deductible resetting a month after I cleared that whole nest egg.
Oh,
So that was hugely complicated for me. And then also learning about billing and insurance and what for those who don't understand, once you get a cancer diagnosis, you get put on this conveyor belt where you're getting further diagnostic testing, and that all happens pretty quickly. And not it doesn't necessarily hit your billing yet. So I was getting bills through the post all the time. Some of them were done without the other things hitting the billing, and I just had no idea what I owed, what I didn't owe, how it was all going to net out. I felt like I was just kind of spending loads of money. I got really overwhelmed. I actually hated answering the phone at one point because some of it got sent to collections because I hadn't paid a bill, but I'd gotten two bills through. So I wasn't sure what I should be paying or not paying, or sometimes the paperwork hadn't gone through at their end. I had a few where you get scam phone calls because you pop up on some sort of register and they want you to pay them instead of paying the hospital. So, and I was so naive to all of this. It was overwhelming. It was insane. And I was also doing things that weren't necessarily covered on insurance. So things like fertility preservation wasn't covered. And it was just such an overwhelming experience. So that was really, really challenging. And now every year I have my spreadsheet. I have my appointments. They go in the spreadsheet. I see how much the bills come through. I total it all up. And when I hit my insurance, I hit my deductible, I hit my out of pocket max. I know those things. And every year I start again. But it was so overwhelming for me at the start. And then also, there's so many unexpected things that happen. So I was very fortunate that my company had really good disability and I was able to take time off as and when I needed it, which isn't always the case. But I wasn't prepared for some of the things. Like I was, I would go to the grocery store and shop around to get the best deals for groceries here, there, and everywhere, and cook at home. And I would walk instead of getting an Uber, or little things to save money. And you just lose some of those luxuries, and then you're eating food on the go. You're paying for all this extra, you need extra equipment, you need new clothing, so there was a lot of unexpected expenses, and I just felt like I really lost control of my finances. And I was very fortunate that I had a decent income and steady income. I wasn't working hourly, I was salaried, but it was still really challenging. So I think, and then, sorry, the final thing I do want to highlight is getting diagnosed with cancer at this point in my career. Although I had great disability, I feel like it did kind of hamper my career progression some. And you never know how things might have gone, but I definitely wasn't on my A game. I was fighting for my life. So I wasn't doing all the things that I could have been doing. And part of me always wonders, where would I have got to in my career and what would my income be if I'd accelerated in the way that I was kind of plotting? I was such a career girl. I was first one into the office, last one out, and all of that had to change. So it's an ongoing effect for sure. And it's really challenging to navigate.
I mean, I definitely want to talk more about that part, like the career path. So Julia, talk to us. What was it like for you?
Well, to that career aspect, I know you said you want to talk about that. I quit my job from the hospital parking lot. I was a travel nurse. I only had 3 weeks left on my contract. So I just called and I said, hey, remember that weird rash we thought I had? Yeah, it turns out it's cancer, so I'm not coming back. And luckily they were very, very lovely about it. But then I kind of put all of my focus into finding every grant and every everything possible to kind of help pay for things, which was great because now I have valuable information for all of my new friends who go through this, right?
Right.
But a big thing for me that happened was I met with the social worker and I said, should I apply for disability? And she said no. And I believed her. She's a social worker. Like, this is what she does. And I ended up so I went through all my treatment and I got a contract to go back to work in a much smaller capacity, not as a travel nurse anymore. I was going to make what I made in a month, or in a week, in a month. Like, it was, yeah, And right after I had signed that contract, I found out that that social worker was wrong.
Oh.
And because I had inflammatory breast cancer, there is this thing called the Compassionate Allowance List, and it's about 200 diseases that basically automatically qualify for disability. We get fast tracked through the system because it's either so deadly or because the side effects are so severe. Hence, for this is because of some cancer side effects. And I went through my whole entire savings while I went through 9 months of treatment, and I didn't have a choice. I had to go back to work. And so, I went back to work to this different job. And while I had great insurance and great hours, it was still too much. And I ended up getting really sick, even post cancer. And I got to the point where I went in to see my oncologist, and she was like, you're either quitting this job or you're going on FMLA because this is killing you. And I was just like, oh, right. So then that was kind of like my big wake up call. And I don't blame my employer at all, anything like that. Like, it was not on them. Like, that, I blame that social worker. But so it was my wake up call. And now conventional society, and they say I have a bit of a toxic view on money, but it's been very freeing for me. And I'm just kind of like, you know what, as long as I have enough to have a roof over my head and a little bit saved up, that's good. And I am going to use my money to do what I want to do and what is best for my family. And so for the last 9 months, that's been traveling America with my husband after I left that job. So yeah, it is a wild ride, this cancer thing. And the career thing, I don't know if I'll ever go back to nursing because of all the side effects. And that's really difficult and a really hard pill to swallow because, much like Elle, I was career girl too, and I just didn't even realize it. And it's still in my blood, and maybe someday, it'll change. But for now, this is where I'm at, and that's okay.
I mean, it's like, have to extend that grace to yourself, because everything that you're experiencing is like, it's the unknown. Like, you didn't know. And I agree as far as like career. I wasn't where I wanted to be in my career. And then also too, I had never used my health insurance in that kind of way ever. And that's when I learned, oh, good insurance and medium bad and then super bad insurance. And yeah, and high deductibles, like finding out all this terminology. And that was really hard. Like, I remember when I got that diagnosis and when I met with my oncologist for the first time, my second thought was, how am I going to pay for all this? And I hate that that was even like a thought. Like, we should just all be focused on the treatments and, getting through this, not dying. And instead, I was all like, oh my God, how much is this going to cost? Because I know it can bankrupt people. Fortunately, that did not happen. I did do a GoFundMe, and it was so hard because I was so prideful. And my therapist at that time was like, you have breast cancer, not the flu. She was like, this would be the time to ask for help. And it was, I mean, it took me weeks before I would do it because I was like, I don't want people to think, like all these things I just got. And then I was like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, all those incidentals and unknown charges. I was like, yeah, I'm going to need some help. And then when I discovered my oncology social worker, and that's unfortunate that you had one that gave you awful advice there, Julia. I found mine. If I hadn't read every single sheet of paper, and it was like it was on a yellow sheet of paper and all text. If I hadn't read that, and if I hadn't been curious when it said oncology social worker assigned to my oncologist, I was just like, what's DFACS doing working in oncology? I totally didn't understand. And so I called. If I had not called, no one would have told me the absolute gold mine of information, resources. I never would have known. She also helped me, with applying for grants. And a lot of times she would do it like on my behalf. She's like, I just need this and this. You're going through chemo. Like, I know you're fatigued. I can handle this part. I'll call you if I have any other questions. And like consistently, because I think what a lot of people don't realize, it's not just the medical bills. It's like life. It's your rent. It's your mortgage. It's the utilities, your car. Like all of those things continue as you're going through cancer. And it can really hit you hard financially, and it can be really hard to ask for help. And as far as career, I ended up changing my entire career. I was working in media and marketing, but I was not where I wanted to be. And even though I was in my late 30s, life happens, you make some bad choices, etc. But once I entered quote unquote survivorship, I was like, I'm doing a lot of advocacy, not even realizing it was advocacy. And I started writing, and that's how I became known in cancer land. And I was like, okay, imagine if I could do this full time, the impact, the changes. And I ultimately changed my whole career to work in this space, not because I felt pressure to, but it felt like the right thing to do because I couldn't not talk about the barriers, the disparities, etc.
Mm.
Anything
It's a
else?
very common thing in the AYA space of, once you get into survivorship, I hear it all the time. People saying, I am not fulfilled anymore in this career. And I don't like it. And it's not what it used to be. And I can't handle Sue Ellen from 2 cubicles down coming and complaining to me about, her whatever, her goiter every day. Like, and it's just like, I get it, and it's a unique challenge when you're an AYA, and everyone, especially if you go back to the same job, because people expect you to perform at the same ability you were performing at. And I feel like 9.9 times out of 10, that's not a real statistic, but that's how I feel. It's not the case. And, whether it be brain fog from chemo or just fatigue from ongoing treatments, like, once you're done with chemo, you're not done with treatment. Like a lot of us have had our ovaries out or we're on ovarian suppression and all of these things. And that leads to brain fog. And then you go back to this career and they're like, well, you're not performing as well. Why aren't you performing as well? And you're like, I'm not better. I'm not okay. And then, the resentment builds up in your coworkers because they're like, well, I thought you were better. Why do you have to take off and go to the doctor all the time? Why are you still going to PT? Like, aren't we over this? And you're like, no, for me, it's never over. I sound like a cheesy pickup line. It was never over. But
Elena, what do you have to say, when you were like, I wonder what it would have been like how much did my, cancer diagnosis impact me?
It was a double-edged sword, right? Or two sides. There were some positives for sure. Like I think I have learned a lot about boundaries and setting boundaries and taking care of myself and making myself the top priority, which however much your employer says they care about you, you're not their top priority ever. You have to be your own top priority. And that was a really difficult concept for me to grasp. And I see people, peers around me, I see more junior employees, I see more senior employees who haven't learned that lesson and who aren't happy and fulfilled because of it. So, in that respect, it's really positive. But I was on, I was working so hard pushing towards these goals. And I did feel like I wasn't able to, outperform in the same way. I wasn't able to kind of build my reputation and be ready and available for new opportunities as they came up, because I was dealing with so much else for so long. So I do think that my career has stalled, and it takes a lot to be okay with that and to be like, my wellness comes first, and to not care so much about where I'm getting in the corporate ladder. Um, so it definitely was a tough pill to swallow and very difficult to navigate. But I am glad I've learned that lesson because I think it's one that's going to serve me really, really well.
I mean, 100. I had gotten like my dream job at a huge ad agency. I mean, it was like so hard to even get in there. And it was right after I had to get a hysterectomy and oophorectomy, and I wasn't even a year out of my breast cancer treatment. And I didn't realize how hard that would be on the body. And I went in like, yes, I felt sharp all of a sudden. Then it was like the pressure. I used to love the frenetic pace of media, and I was starting to like the fatigue and the brain fog, or sometimes it can be called chemo brain. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I couldn't handle the pressure that I used to thrive off of, and I was devastated. And I learned very quickly, yeah, not all employers care. Like, I mean, it is true. And I finally had to be like, I have to put my health first. Like, I only have this one body, like I have to make changes. And it was a huge, difficult pill to swallow when, like, both of you, when you've worked your whole time and you had like a certain like career path in mind, and then you get diagnosed with cancer. And the reason why we talk about AYA cancer and those challenges of being under 40, you're not where you want to be yet in your career, at least the bulk of us. Like, you're still evolving and changing, and you sometimes just can't keep up with that pace once, if you've entered survivorship or if you're living with stage 4. This is deep, y'all. Deep.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we do.
Right? I'd love to, well, I mean, we basically already talked about our career and in our work. I'm wondering, what does life look like for you now? With all the changes that we've discussed here today, and career changes, and really like putting yourself first, your happiness first, what does life look like for you? Elena, let's start with you.
I think life looks very different now. I think I am 4 years out from my cancer diagnosis. And if I think about 4 years before my cancer diagnosis, a lot can happen and change in 4 years, right? So this has been a particularly transformative 4 years for me. But life is good. I feel like I've hit a good balance. For a long time, I felt like I was fully in the cancer world, cancer land. And then I was trying to be, okay, cancer is done, fully in the real world. And I feel like I've hit the balance of being somewhere in between. And I've found a way that's meaningful to me to give back. because that was so important to me when I was going through it. I wanted to give back. I felt all these wonderful things that had happened for me. And there is something so beautiful in the cancer community of knowing that there are women who've gone before you who you will never meet, that you are benefiting from their legacy. Even women who've died and passed away, there's clinical trials, there's support groups, there's charities, there's blogs online. Like there's so much that people have left behind so that you don't have to go through this in the same way that they did. And that is so special. And I wanted to pay it forward to the next people. And I really struggled to find my place and figure out what was a good fit for me and my style, what felt authentic. So I'm really appreciative and glad to be part of the Share Facilitator group. So being able to run that group is so important and meaningful for me. And I think also having a healthy dose of non-cancer life is also important to me. It's nice not to always be looking over my shoulder. I'm finally coming to terms with what happened and where I'm at. I definitely still have low periods and hard days. I'm not anywhere near as fearless as I used to be. I think I thought I was invincible. And that has really been shaken. And that is hard as well sometimes, like when I'm doing some of my more adventurous endeavors, feeling a little bit more afraid for my well-being or the consequences of my actions, right? I know how it feels to be down and in hospital and not be able to do things for myself and lose independence. So it's definitely different. But life on the other side feels pretty good. I'm really grateful for everything that I have.
Love that. Love that. Julia, how about you?
Yeah.
And give the deets on when the support group meets and everything.
Yes. We're on the fourth Wednesday of the month at 6 p.m. Eastern. I have to really think about time zones sometimes, being a nomad this last year. So 6 p.m. Eastern, and we're roughly an hour, but sometimes we go over. It's a really beautiful space, and people just come, and we kind of, support groups can be a little scary at first, right? So just come as you are, and whatever you need support with, just bring it. And somebody there has probably gone through the same thing. And if we don't know, if no one's there who's gone through it, we'll find someone, promise you. So yeah, but to answer the question, where am I now? That's kind of funny because Elle said she's less fearless, but I am more fearless now, maybe sometimes a bit too much. And, I don't care about keeping up with the Joneses anymore. I am so much happier and just doing what's right for me and, not in the rat race and all of that. And it's really beautiful. It's a pure happiness. It's not a conditional. So yeah.
Wow. I would say for me and working in this space, it was an adjustment to make sure that I set boundaries as well, right? Because I work in this space. But something I always like to tell others is cancer can't take away the essence of you. And the essence of me is dramatic, loves theater, voiceovers. And so I have really worked hard to carve out time to pursue some of those things on my bucket list. Like I was in a Christmas movie last year, and it's going to be like re-released widely the end of this year in December. Like I was like, oh my God, I was in a movie. Yeah, you really do see me. It's not just like, there she goes and then she's gone. I was like, oh my God. And that was something I'd really kind of lost, I think, before cancer. I was just about that rat race of like, I got to do this, I got to do that. And I've actually discovered talents that I didn't know I had post-cancer, when meeting new people and talking with them. And it turns out I was like, oh, I can actually read like abstracts and write that, write a recap in like patient-friendly ways. Who knew? And so that's been kind of exciting too, is tapping into talents that I didn't know I had, but also it's sometimes hard to conserve my energy because I also deal with chronic pain from my breast cancer, that collateral damage of, you know, for most people, it's not just one surgery, one and done. It's multiple surgeries, infections, blood transfusions, radiation, all of that. And that does a lot to the body. And because we were diagnosed under 40, it rapidly ages the body. And so I don't feel as like physically strong. I even walk different, and sometimes my head doesn't match my feet because I used to walk in long strides, and now I have to do kind of short, quick steps because I have chemo-induced peripheral neuropathy in my feet, and I don't want to trip. You know, it's so many things I've had to modify, but I will say I've been able to like check off some of the things on my bucket list that I don't think I would have really pushed for until now.
It's beautiful.
You know, as we wrap up this impactful, vulnerable, beautiful conversation, I would love, you know, to get some takeaways that we can give our listeners on the unique challenges of being part of the AYA cancer community, the AYA breast cancer community. Let's kick that off with Julia.
Yeah. So I think one of the most important things that whether you have breast cancer or not is to know your breast, know what your normal is. And if you don't know what's normal and what's not, ask your doctor. They will be more than happy to help you understand what's normal and what's not, especially if you're someone who has dense breasts or who has lumpy breasts as a baseline. So I just want to make sure I mention that because it is so important. And you know, you can be you have a relationship with your primary, and that's part of that. But for the AYA experience, breast cancer experience, it's those unique needs that we have. You know, the fertility that we didn't get fertility, and financial and career and all of those things. We have unique needs, and it's, you know, even late term recurrence. And, you know, we can say, hey, I'm trying to live for another 60 years, not another 20. And how is this medication going to affect me long term, not just right now? And the other thing I would say is to really help an AYA, do what my friends did and just offer up really specific things that you know you can do and deliver on. It's so helpful versus, what do you need? How can I help? That's great. And it's so kind. But if you say, hey, on Tuesday, I would love to pick up your kids from school for you if you need it. Hey, on Wednesday, I could make you dinner. I'm just going to leave it on the porch. You don't need to entertain me. Those are the things that are really important, I think.
Elena, how about you?
I think, as Julia said, the best advice I could offer is being the expert on your own body. You might feel young and invincible. You might feel old and invincible. You might feel old and vulnerable. However you feel, you should be the expert and the advocate for your body. So going for those checkups, finding the time, prioritizing yourself and your wellness, being your own best advocate, those things are also important. But in a broader sense, one of the biggest things for me is that going through a cancer diagnosis is really lonely. And I think that is the same with a lot of life's big, difficult moments. What makes it much harder is loneliness and feeling isolated. There are so many wonderful resources and things out there. If you're going through something difficult, try and find someone to help you. Ask for help. If someone you know is going through something hard, I know for myself, I sometimes didn't know the right thing to say, and I would end up saying nothing. And actually, I've come to realize it's better to say the wrong thing and apologize than say nothing. So just connecting with people, being there for each other, we can't make cancer better, but we can make it a little bit less lonely. So that would be my biggest take home.
Oh, I love that. And it's so true, right? Like you may feel alone, but you're not alone. And I think, for me, it's important to find the people that you gel with. And now we have so many more resources, now because we have the technology. And so whether you're in the States or, out of the country, you really can find amazing friendships. Oftentimes when I'm traveling, either for work or personally, I'll be like, hey, who's in Boston? I'm coming to Boston. Anyone want to get together? And I'm actually like meeting up with people that we've talked to on social media, never met in person, but as soon as we meet in person, it's just like, friends for life. But something I would say that I'd want to remind people about AYA cancer is sometimes our friends die and we have, someone in their 20s, someone in their 30s dying, and no one prepares you for that because these friendships are so intense and so deep and meaningful. And when they die, and then when it's like multiple people seem to die, like within the same month, even the same week, that's really hard to process in that survivor's guilt. And that is something I know can be carried whether you're an AYA or not, but it really does hit a little differently when you're under 40 and you think to yourself, oh my gosh, I've got to make sure that I live life. You just never know how quickly your health can change. If you get a recurrence or become metastatic or another health issue stemming from all of the treatments that you had. So those are some things I'd want to, remind people about the unique challenges that we face. Well, Julia and Elena, thank you so much for being here, for being so open and real about your experiences. And for anyone listening who is also part of the AYA community, again, this is a reminder, and each of us have said this, you are not alone. And if you're looking for a support group, you best check out Cher's AYA Breast Cancer Support Group, where you can connect with others that truly get it. And that's the thing too, in support groups, like you want to vibe with the people in the group. And that's what I do love about Cher's AYA Breast Cancer Support Group. These fabulous facilitators here, but also just brilliant, women. You vibe, you talk about things, you connect. And that's what I love so much about this group and the fact that, you were leading it. I really appreciate y'all.
We appreciate you.
All right. Well,
Yes.
oh,
This
thanks.
has been wonderful. Thank you so much. And I actually have learned so much about you this time around too, because I know I've met you a few times, but it's been so great to hear a little bit more about you and learn about you also. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
You bet. Back at ya. Well, everyone, thank you so much for listening. And until next time, thanks.